As Lilette already introduced us, we're Remy and Marlies, we're trained as architects, but we work as cartopologists. And this presentation will just give you a small introduction of what Deer Hunter does, and also of the Institute of Cartopology. Deer Hunter is really our practice, where we work for municipalities, provinces, other kinds of institutions that have to deal with regions and with the development of regions. And the Institute of Cartopology is really a way for us to reflect on our own practice. It's also a place, a virtual place even, where I do my PhD, my artistic research PhD, about cartopology, and both are constantly intertwining or are intertwined with each other. Yeah, I think that's it as some sort of introduction. Maybe just the image that I'm showing is based on the full capman of the world, which is the right side of the, or actually I think the right side, I don't know if it's switched, but it's the Institute of Cartopology side of the screen, which is actually a fool, it's representing a fool, and then in his face and his vision, you see a map that is represented, that is drawn, which we think is quite an interesting way of introducing each time a lecture, because there's really 100 ways of looking at the world, 1,000 ways, 1,000,000 ways of looking at the world, of trying to find something of it, it is actually, well, you could question if the cartographer is not really a fool trying to put his own vision on paper. So it's trying to laugh a little bit with ourselves and to have a perspective that we're only one way that we're only mapping in one way, and it's only partly the truth, or adding something to a certain location. The left side, the Deer Hunter side, is then more based on how, or on the scale that we work, which is most of the time the size of a city. It's more urban scale, let's say. I have prepared in this presentation 6 points that I will introduce to you. And as I said briefly before to Lilette already, you can always stop me at any point, because they're quite independent from each other. In those 6 points, I will somehow jump each time from the Institute and a more reflection point of view, and other maps from other people that I really admire. Sorry, Mitch, there's not one of you in it yet, but I think after Wednesday that will be the case, or after Thursday, after tomorrow. And then on the other side, we will also show our maps, what we think works well and what we think still needs to be improved. But first, let's just have a small introduction of what cartopology actually is, what it does. And actually, it's very easy to explain. It starts just by saying that everything takes place. An event, even the start of this pandemic, started somewhere. We're able to even locate that. Everything that we talk about, everything that we experience is related to a location. So the what and where is somehow very much related to each other. Although if you look at a lot of disciplines, it's quite complicated to see where narrative and space is really combined in a way. There are disciplines that minimize the role of spaciousness, of nearness, and of what a building and public space can do, such as anthropology and ethnography. They really focus on social behavior and social interaction. And then if you look at architecture, we're quite or urban planning, or the discipline in the broadest sense, but also cartography. We like to have an overview. We like to abstract things. We don't really go into locality. We don't really go in the perception and the experience of space. I know it's very black and white, but it's really on that intersection where cartopology tries to position itself. It's trying, it's literally a combination of cartography and anthropology, and it really tries to combine space and narrative in a quite organic way. And it uses also techniques of both types of disciplines. So it does field work. It also tries to deal with or connect with the architectural map, for instance. So that is a very, very shortly what cartopology really is about. Will become more and more clear during the rest of the presentation. Now, let's go. Oh, not that fast. Let's just go with the first point. This is not a typical architectural office today, especially not today, but I think it's very typical on how we work. We really, really like to work on a 2D, on the flattened surface, on paper or on the screen. We really like to map everything. And here we do it very collectively, and we always do it inside. It's always in a building. We rarely have the time are given the time to have a look outside. We map everything. We as architects, but also more broadly, we think it's very important to have everything on paper to be able to deal with the situation, to be able to change it, to modify it. And it's something that we're quite good at. We have thousands of programs that have enormous amount of options just to be able to draw what is there and how to transform and modify it. And this is one of those typical urban plans. It's a plan of a part of Maastricht in the south of the Netherlands. And if you look at the zoom on the right, that is a zoom from this part more or less. And what I think is quite interesting to see is that the only thing you see on this zoom on this side is actually squares, triangles, and if you're lucky, a circle that represents a tree. And it's one way of representing, it's one way of abstracting, and it's important to somehow be able to have that abstraction and to be able to structure and organize. But we believe as cartopologists, and especially also within Deer Hunter, that this type of maps is also an important layer to add. It's also important to really look at the location on that level, on very local, lively level. And if you look at the square, which is here more or less a triangle, then you see that it changes shape and it's much more active and present and intimate on that location. There's a lot of things that are left out here that are still filled in there. So you see there already the fool that I started to my presentation with, that different types of representation, different sorts of mapping are really necessary to combine in order to have an idea of what is really happening on the location. And shouldn't we as architects, urban planners, be much more aware of what is happening instead of only, I know not only, but mostly focusing on this kind of maps? And shouldn't we also not have to connect to that type of maps? I think that's quite important. Another example, because architecture is definitely not the only discipline that has complexity with or has difficulties with layers and with combining different different scales and different proportions. And this is an example of these are two pictures of forests. The upper picture is an example of a scientific forest. And underneath is a forest, one that we would all like to walk in during our time off, let's say, or even while you're working, I don't know. And what is the difference is if you look at the one above, you really see that you have the trees here, and then there you have some sort of intersection between. If you look at the one here, you really see that it's much more, it's much less controlled. It's the layers are not so controllable. There's a lot of things happening. But imagine that you are a bee. in this part, it might be quite complicated to really find flowers, etc., and so on, to do your thing. And on the picture on beneath, it's much easier. And that is something that that also scientists making this kind of forest really learned of it, that deconstructing that much and only being able to think of one layer and then the other one and then the other one and not relating them to each other, is quite problematic. It is actually made the forest die instead of really be able to understand it. So understanding a location is not understanding it in layers, but it's understanding different types of layers, different types of ways of dealing with the location at the same time. And that is something that cartopology also definitely wants to encourage, that we really try to find experiences on location, trying to reflect on them, abstract them, and also in the other direction. An example of that is a project that Deer Hunter did some time ago, and we did some field work on 6 different locations, which you find here on the top. And we literally were working with layers that you can find in the soil. So these are somehow soil samples, and it really worked because the maps were for ecologists and archaeologists, and they could work with this type of information or this type of representation. Then instead of really thinking about this kind of soil, we gave it really local and more social subjects in a way. And in that way, we really try to deal with representation with layers and trying to represent a place on in a completely different scale. This was only one image of the of different maps that we presented, but just to give you an example of how we try to deal with layers, and this is a very typical and or very direct and literal way of doing that. Number 2 is different types of information. I already was talking about it. I think it's very important to think of different types and different sorts of informations. The map that you see on the left side is a map that I found on a typical French market. I think I paid too much for it, but anyway, and there's nothing special about it. It's from the somewhere half 19th century, I think, and it's not even a beautiful one, or at least I'm not really much attracted to it. But what I really think is interesting is looking at all the different parts that you see on the other side. They are quite it's quite interesting if you look a second time, or if you look a little bit closer to that map, all those different types and sorts of informations that are on it. For instance, there's text on it, there's perspective drawings on it, there's cartographical drawings on it, there are context drawings on it, there's a measurement and a scale on it, there's many things are on it, and I can't imagine that this map is really made to navigate. That is not really the purpose of this map. I think the purpose of this map is really to show the region, to show maybe how connected it is, but also to show the important people of that place, and that it really means something, that important people were growing up or working in that area. It's also showing the harbor over there, which is also apparently quite important for that region in France. And that combination of different types of information and of insights and of, if you want to call it data, then call it data, but combining it, and also combining different ways of drawing and of representing from a very cartographical precise center towards maybe more ethnographical or anthropological drawings on the side, combining it. That is what I think is very interesting about this map. If you look at this map, for example, this is an example of the opposite. This is a map of the Euregion Meuse-Rhine, which is a border region between this part is Belgium, with Hasselt here, Liège here, this is a part of Limburg in the Netherlands with Maastricht here, and then this is a part of Germany with Aachen here. These are the biggest cities in this region. And what is very typical about this region is that, of course, you have a 3 countries point, which is over there, and they have lots of borders. And borders are really important for this region because it's without those borders, that region wouldn't even exist in a way. It wouldn't have, it wouldn't even have a map. It would simply not exist because of the borders. It became a region with funding, with some sort of rules, with all types of political issues, and it also makes it a very rich region because all of a sudden you can go from a Dutch city to a German city, or from a German city to a Belgian city. Well, not now because the border is closed with Belgium, but normally you can go, and it's that richness that they always say that is very important for the region. The fact that you can cross the border, you have multiple cultures here. We are much more European citizens than, for instance, in Amsterdam or in Brussels, because we really cross the border daily without even thinking of, and I really think it's true. But if you then look at the map, this is the official map of the Eurasian Rhine. They only have 4 types of ways of depicting, of representing that border. The one here, the one here, the one here, and the one, let's have a look here. Those 4, let's say. Between cities, between countries, between regions, and then the border of the Eurasian Rhine themselves. And we started this project by saying it's actually, you can't even think of how is it possible that we use a map of the Eurasian Rhine that is really saying those borders, and the fact that we can cross them is such a richness for this region, and that we only depict them in 4 different types. So that is something that we try to do with this map. We try to do justice to the border, to do justice to where the border manifests itself, where the border really comes looking around the corner, where all of a sudden you feel that you have crossed the border. And we use this type of grid to really try to fill it in and try to do border crossing acts, so to literally cross the border and try to map the experience and the insights, the reflections that we got during that type of fieldwork. And then on the right side, you see a type of a border crossing grid, let's say, that is filled in, and then each bit is really another representation, another insight of one place where you cross the border, which you can see there. And that's quite interesting to see that all of a sudden we become much more richer in our representation. All of a sudden, all different types of experiences and all different types of reflection of that border, instead of only having 4, all of a sudden now we have plenty of them. And that is the third thing that I wanted to say to you, is that we try to find a way of drawing together, especially in that project, because it can't just be about our experiences crossing the border, or about one of people that are working with us, but we really wanted to share it. As you see in the video on the left, they are all filling in grids after they crossed a certain border. We wanted to make it open source. We wanted to be able, that we're not the only cartopologists, that also other people can use this method or can appropriate this method. And that is really something that is a question that the Institute of Cartopology is really dealing with. How can we share really what we're doing, that others can also learn from it, that others can also maybe better read cartopological maps, that can contribute to that type of making maps and dealing with space in a way. So that is something that we try to do. And we think it's quite important. And this project really helped us learning that, really helped us opening up that we're not the only ones that are drawing or that are doing fieldwork, but that we could combine different types of drawings and different people that are drawing, without it coming to be too much of a participation project or too much of a let's all draw together and be happy forever. That was not at all the starting point of it, but it was really how can we combine spatial experiences to be able to justify the border on the map from starting from the basic map that I showed some slides earlier. Let's go to point 4. Point 4 is it's one of my favorite slides. It's slides about the sea monster, which you see here, and about the coastline, which you can see here. And it's really the contrast between the two that I would like you to look at. It's a map from the 17th century, and what I think is interesting, especially in that period of time, people were exploring the world everywhere we were going, not always with good intentions or rarely with good intentions, but that's not at all what I wanted to talk about. What I think is interesting to see is that this map is not at all made for navigation. It's not at all made to use on one of those ships that you see. It's really used to go it's really used to show how much we know of the world, to show the stories and the richness of our knowledge in a way. And then you see the coastline here, which is quite precisely depicted. It seems something that we would believe immediately. We also can recognize Portugal and then a part of Africa. But then if you look at the sea monster, and the amount of detail in that sea monster, you can imagine how much time the cartographer took in just drawing and working on that sea monster. And it's not that salesmen or cartographers from that time believed really that or knew that they existed because they have never seen one. They also knew that you couldn't prey on a fish, or they knew that you couldn't like land, or I don't know how to say that in English, with your boat on or your ship on the fish, let's say. They knew that that wasn't true, but that was not at all the case, and that wasn't a problem in that map. It was really showing how we were dealing with the world, how we were dealing with our anxieties, how unsure we were when we checked in, let's say, on the ship, starting to travel. God knows if we will ever come back. It was really showing the story of that time, of that world. And that is something that we forgot somehow today. If you look on Google Maps, even though that one we mostly use to navigate and you can't really compare them, if you would look on that exact same location, you wouldn't really see any sea monster anymore. You wouldn't really see a story that is told. You might maybe see a picture that somebody has uploaded, but that's it then. And those stories, the local quality, if you want the narrative quality, the anthropological quality, it's all not the complete right words, but really that side is something that we forgot to map, and that is something that we have to add, and that is something that cartopology really, that's the mission of cartopology, to add that on maps again. An example of one of the maps that are used today is of that we made, I think last year, the year before, is let's show it again in totality. Is again a map of the border region. I stayed in the same region, and it's about let me find. Yeah, it's about slag heaps. Slag heaps are little mountains that are actually full of waste from former mining industry. And in this region, across borders, across the border here, so also in Germany, the Netherlands, and in Belgium, you have a lot of them. And what is interesting to see is that they have been treated very differently, although it's the same type of mountain or hill. It's the same. It comes from the same history, from the same sort of cultural heritage. But if you see this one here, the first one. That one is one in Wallonia, so close to Heerlen. This one is in the Netherlands, and this one is also in Belgium, but then in the north of Belgium. Also in this region, but is in the north of this region. And in this first one, maybe if I now zoom in this first one, the slag heap is still a slag heap, meaning that if you want to dump your garbage, you still dump it on that slag heap, which is really a pity. It's still smoking a little bit, so it's burning inside, which makes it very dangerous to climb it. You can climb it and you have a very beautiful view of the city, but also of the whole region. But it's still somehow a dump. The people with the less chances live close to this slag heap, which was in former times as well. If you then look to this one is in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, they don't really have a lot of mountains, not to say none. No, that's not true, but not much. This mountain, it's almost, especially in this region, it's almost a holy place in a way. It's really a place where they put stairs up to walk all up the hill. They couldn't imagine in Wallonia here that you would want to walk up that hill, want to walk up a garbage hill in a way. Well, here they do it, and they almost made it something that you need to pay for. They made it almost something that you have to somehow pay entrance to go there. And then the last one is quite interesting because this one is in Genk, and they already have the time not only to focus on the slag heap anymore, but to focus on visualizing how it was under the earth, how the coal mining really was happening when it was still active in the how do you call it? In the hallways of digging the mines, let's say, and that different types of approaches. It's something that you can only understand when you're there, when you live close by. We have been on location on. I'll go into it a little bit later on those 3 different locations. We have been visiting it an enormous amount of times, and it's only that type of. It's that type of hidden knowledge, that isn't visible, that people take for granted, that you don't talk about anymore. It's that knowledge that makes a location specific. It's that makes one place different than another one. And if we wouldn't have mapped like that, this is a completely different approach than that one and that one, nobody would have really cared about it. Although now politicians are aware of that, are aware of the fact that we really could learn from each other's approach. And that is something that I think is quite interesting to see, that that just by mapping it, by visualizing something that we all know, but that we don't talk about it anymore, all of a sudden becomes an agenda point, let's say. Number 5 from the 6, let's say. Number 5 is about, it's an example of one of my heroes, Alexander von Humboldt, which I think if I would have lived in his time, let's say, I would be his girlfriend. Nobody else, I would be it, and I would like join him in all his travels, because I think he did an amazing job. And this is one of his maps that he made. I'll just explain it briefly. It's a map of a mountain in the Andesgebergte in the south of America, and he climbed that mountain, which was quite a complicated thing to do, or expedition to do, without oxygen mask, without with all the material that we have now. But anyway, he did it. That's one reason why he's my hero. But another reason is that he was able to combine different types of knowledge. For instance, on this side and on that side, we really see some sort of grid with measurements that he took of, for instance, humidity, temperature, according to which height he was on the mountain. And if you look here in the middle, you can really divide a left side and a right side on that mountain. Also, another reason why he would be my boyfriend, or I would be his girlfriend, is that he was one of the first, not to say the first, that he was drawing a mountain like that, and not on top view, which really made it much easier to show his point and to prove his point, and to find out his point. So it's through drawing that he really saw what was happening, and he learned this way of looking. Because if I would like drawing this further, this would be like a chart which is something that also came up in that time when he was traveling, and it reminded him of, oh, maybe this is some sort of mountain, and I can use this type of representation instead of always from top view. Because what did he do on the right side? All those little lines you see are actually words of plants and insects and everything he came across. And by putting them according to the height, he could prove that the more you go up, or that also plants and insects change, not only horizontally, but also vertically. And that is a point that he could prove by really showing this map, by combining the exact measurements on the left and the right side. And then one last thing about this map is this side, which is quite interesting as well. It's some sort of atmospherical drawing of that mountain. And it's somehow also a quite romantic way of depicting it. It was a steep mountain, and he was really brave when he was climbing it, but it wasn't that steep. It wasn't, I don't know how many degrees this would be. I don't know, I'm not an engineer, but that is really steep. And just by showing how steep it is, or by exaggerating in that, some people say that by that he was really showing or telling something about the journey of his narrative, of his expedition. And combining all that type of information really helps you to look for a long time at this map and really understand what is happening there. And the combination of drawing, more artistic way of representing, and that scientific information is quite impressive, I believe. Now, it's strange to first show his map and then only the man, but I'm still more in love with maps than with boys. So anyway, this is Alexander von Humboldt, and that's his companion Remy Kroese. And I only show this picture or this painting by Ender for just showing how he was working. I'm not sure if it's true, I'm not sure if it's not exaggerated, but really what I think that you can get out of this painting are also very important for cartopology. The first thing that you see, it wasn't a man of order. He was quite chaotic. Everything that you see, all those things are laying around, and it's a messy process being a cartopologist. It's not starting with A and ending with B. It is a process of searching, of opening up to other disciplines, of opening up to other approaches, to other methodologies, to really find out what is happening. And at the end, you don't know what you're looking for, and at the beginning you don't know what you're looking for. You bump against a lot of dead ends, and that chaos, that mess, being comfortable in it is quite important to be able to deal with different types of representations. A second thing, what you see here are those instruments. There's one here. I think Bonpland also has something in his hand. There's also one here. If you can look, if you look closely. And actually, Humboldt, he wasn't at all happy with this painting, because he found that the representation of those instruments wasn't precise enough. And that's exactly my point. He used those instruments to have on the left and on the right side of his map. Let's say here, here and here. He really used it to have those measurements, but it also says something about precision, about how precise he was, how obsessed he was about representation and about being detailed. And that's something that's quite important for a cartopologist as well. What he's doing here is he's making field notes. So he's not just going on site and then coming back and then starting his map. No, it's a constant process of making. It's through mapping and through representation that he was able to put things together that normally you wouldn't put together. So it's in that action of drawing, in that action of making or doing cartopology, that things came together. And then the last but not least important thing is what you see here, is that he's on location. He's on site, he's in the field, he's not in an office like the picture from the architects that I showed at the beginning of the presentation, but he's really there, he's doing field work for, in his case, years and years and years. And that is really important if you want to understand a location. You have to be on site. You have to go and participate and observe at the same time. You constantly have to look, reflect, participate in what is happening. You don't have to ask people how they do things, but you have to see how they do things to really understand a location. And that is also what we do, what Deer Hunter does. And that's my last point. We go on location. We don't do that in huts like Humboldt, but we have our own transformed shipping container. In this case, he's at the UvA in Amsterdam, where we work together with the university to map their campus. And it's only 12 square meters, which is quite small, but we live in there, let's say, between 6 and 9 months a year. Normally, we would have been in it at the moment, but because of the crisis, we're at home. And we stay, let's say, between 1 and 3 months on one location. This beautiful place in Amsterdam was 3 months. And let's say here is somehow the bathroom. The bed is here and it goes down in the evening. Here's a desk and there's a huge drawing table, and that's it. And it is way too small. It's made to be way too small because we go outside. We go outside to look and to see what is really happening on location. So we live there, we do things like people would normally do, and we constantly reflect on it. So it's not a 9 to 5, it's a 24/7. It's quite intense, but it's the only way we believe to really fully understand a location and to be able to map it cartopologically. And then my last slide is really coming back to the name Deer Hunter at the end, because we think or we see our transformed shipping container as a hunting cabin. That is a metaphor that we used in 2014 to start, because we believe that hunters, even though they kill animals and even though I don't eat meat, we both don't eat meat, they really go on site. They really go on site to observe, they go on site to get to know a place. They don't only look in books, but they really have to go into the hunting cabin to feel the location, to sense it, to be aware of what is happening. And that awareness is something that cartopologists definitely need in its fieldwork. So that's it. I'm back at the beginning. I hope that I was almost or more or less in time. The only thing that I still need to do is thank you for listening. I hope that you're still all there. And if there are questions or remarks, I'm very happy to hear them. And also there are 2 websites, you can have a look on it. Deer Hunter website, deerhunter.eu, is the official commercial one, where we have our normal project. The Institute of Cartopology, Cartopology Point Institute, is one big mess, and it's the way how I communicate my PhD. But feel free to have a look on it and give me comments if you like. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And yes, I can assure you everyone did stay and attend the lecture. It was great to see and hear a little bit more on your practice. But I won't start asking the question, but immediately give the floor to Mitch to has a very first reflection. As I said before, you never met before, and he probably doesn't know much of your work. So please.
Hi everybody, I am Scottish, so we don't speak English very well, so if anything is not clear tonight or tomorrow, please just ask me to repeat it. I'm quite used to that. First of all, I love the talk. I love the word cartopology. I invented my own word, dialectography. I feel like these are either sister disciplines or different takes on the same thing. But yeah, I thought, I just really enjoyed all of that. And I think there's a great richness in the kind of work that you're doing. and the way in which you're not just thinking about the visuals and those outcomes, but also the methodology behind those, and really drawing our attention to that. So I suppose I had like maybe 4 observations, and they're just observations really, that to me really spoke to me, and I think are certainly the roots of how things like cartopology has a wider relevance and a wider use beyond just the original practitioners of it, if you like. I think firstly I really liked the idea of the forest, and the ways of looking at forests and the planted forest versus the organic. It does chime with the way in which I've been looking at the idea of text and webs as a metaphor. I will leave that for tomorrow and talk about that then. But I really thought that was a very powerful way of getting us into thinking about space, its ordering, and its visualization. And I totally am on board with, I think if I'm going to boil it down, it seems that the way you look at maps is, that there's navigation, which we have with the map, but there's also the narrative power of a map, and there's so many ways in which that can be engaged with and extracted in all sorts of fruitful ways. I think another thing where I feel definite affinity but also something I feel is well worth other people looking at is this idea of play and of humour. So many of the images you showed there, you're taking things out of existing maps, you're really looking at how border lines are drawn and represented. And that also goes into that idea of humour as well. And it seems to me that you use humour as a form of reaching out, as a form of connecting, which I think for me, as someone who spent a lot of time in the field, your sense of humour is often the first way in which you're able to look at each other and size each other up and understand each other. So yeah, I felt it was a very strong part of your practice, and one that I felt very familiar with, although you're doing it very much in your own way. My third point is the one about participation, and I really liked how a lot of people talk about participation as if it's intrinsic, innate good. It can be a good, but bad participation, if you like, or superficial participation can be worse than none at all, I think. And I liked, again, how you were talking about going beyond that feel-good process into something that actually means something, that creates ways forward and strong ways of looking at an issue, whether it's spatial or social or both. And again, that felt very much like the kind of things I'm dealing with and wrestling with and losing sleep over sometimes when I'm on a project too. How do you make participation more than just a fun event that makes everyone feel happy for a day, and then we all go back to the misery after that. And lastly, and I think linked to that, and I think the way forward that you seem to show to me was, there's a great power in visualization. There's a great power in giving the means of visualizing over to others. Architects, illustrators, we have a lot of capital around that. It's part of our profession. We kind of hold that power in all sorts of ways. I think if we're thoughtful, we try not to abuse it and be mindful of that. But actually being able to push that idea out about how to visualize things, who gets to input into that and to shape that, is, to me, where true participation, and certainly in our fields, really comes to the fore and is possible. And I think that you were talking about von Humboldt, and I have to say, Marlies, I'm a heterosexual cisgender male, happily married, but if I'd been alive at the time of von Humboldt, I would also have been wanting to marry him too, so we'd had to fight over him. I'd have probably went to jail because it's illegal, but never mind. But yeah, I think that idea of von Humboldt's a very strong one. He really is someone who I think was way ahead of his time in so many ways. And particularly that idea of the action of drawing, the action of noting and being on site, it was so far ahead of its time. So he's a great example, I think, to bring to the fore and remind people of. And I think lastly, and I think one thing that I think will be a strong link between both talks is this idea of, you're looking at slag heaps and the things that happen in those border areas and the things that are different. And there's this idea, I think, for me, of in-betweenness as well, of being between things and between states, that is always raising interesting questions and problems. And I think is where work like yours really shows its strength and its value. So yeah, just thank you for that talk, and can't believe we haven't talked before, but hopefully we will after this, but thank you.
Thanks, yeah, super nice points. Does any of you want to react to any of these points, Marlies or Remy?
Yeah, definitely. Starting with the last one, it's indeed incredible that we haven't met before. So yeah, I hope that this is only a starting point and not just one thing, one moment conversation. Yeah, maybe I won't talk to them in the same order, but maybe starting with participation. It's something that we struggled with for quite a long time, especially from out of the architecture discipline, and we also worked in architecture offices. We always, and also municipalities, ask people to participate in their practice. So we ask people to design. We ask people to come up with policy so that the local park is treated better, or is more secure in a way. And I think we should start thinking about doing it the other way around. And that is what we really try to do. We go on that location to participate in daily life with them as researchers. And it's not something new. It's something that anthropologists, ethnographers always do. But one way or another, when you talk more about spatial disciplines, we don't do that anymore. And I think that's a very important shift to go out and try to understand the location, not to ask people to design with you, but to go and experience with them in a way. So that is something that took us a while to really understand what we were doing, then that we're definitely not the only ones. And therefore having a whole context of methods and tools that we can use. Another thing you said was the humor, and as a form of connecting, and yeah, I think it's true, and also we use a lot of metaphors, and I think it's a way of taking or making things sharp in a way, and of being sure that that you're having the right point in a way. It's with humor you can also, I think, say things that are maybe a little bit more complicated to say without the humor. But I think to be humoristic, not that I think that to work. Not me, the work, is also related to an enormous amount of curiosity, I think, and also to being amazed and astonished by, and being able to refresh that feeling each time when you come on a new location, to again be like a child of I don't know, how 6 years old, I don't know, and be amazed by everything you see, to be able to make a joke about it, or let the work make a joke about it. So yeah, those were two interesting.
Because indeed, Marlies already explained, we sometimes have years where we are in this container for 6 to 9 months a year. And I mean, it won't be hard for you to believe that you, at a certain point, can become cynical about where you are. And again, we're in this damn container. For whom are we doing this actually? So I think also that's where the humor comes in, to keep amazed and fresh, and have a look at the location in a healthy way also. But exactly, I mean, I think we're more and more using humor, and with that also metaphors, consciously. I think it started with a project we did in Belgium in 2016. The works of that were really spot on, really sharp. And if we wouldn't have used metaphors, which were in a way very humoristic, the project would never have been accepted by the client, because it was really spot on and really criticizing behavior of people, but also of the municipality itself. And the way of turning it into a metaphor, the client was laughing about it, but knew exactly where it was about. Yeah. But also people were laughing about it. And this work is now in a museum collection, because of, let's say, the spot-on sharpness, but also the way how it is brought. So I think we're very proud of that. We want to keep it in a way. Yeah.
If I can still continue, Lilet, but otherwise just Yeah, stop. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I think one last thing that you say is about the action of notating and visualization and the fact that drawing is also a very important part and of mapping, of course. And that is something that that I find very complicated in my PhD and my academic work. But for instance, also very difficult to talk and to discuss with policymakers. For instance, we are so used to read stories in one direction in a very straightforwardness from the top left to the bottom right of our paper. We're not used to walk through a map anymore and to simply to ask people to take the same amount of time to one map as to a paper or an article, for instance. Only that is very complicated. And I think it's a pity, and it's something that we really have to strive for, that also that way of looking, that way of notating, that way of bringing together arguments and generating new insights is something that we have to make us, how do you say that, to really fight for, that it stays in our academic field, but also in our way of dealing with things, that reading and text is only one way of representing. And it is a very important one, but there are also other ways of doing that, and we should be able to combine that and to be able to read those different languages if we want to have a fully understanding of actually anything almost.
Great. In the meantime, there are a lot of questions flowing in. I first wanted to give the floor to one of our students. They are from the elective Curating Architecture, so they are following this program and helping with every aspect of it, content-wise and production-wise. Created also the leaflet that is in the chat now. And they prepared some questions. So I would like to ask Enver Peters to ask a first question now.
Yeah, hello. Starting from what scale is it interesting to do this kind of research? The project you do are always on a bigger scale, a university, a village, a city. Do you see this value for smaller places or projects?
Most of the time we work in public space, and that's simply because that's the easiest to get clients. You know, if you put your container in the middle of a square and you make research and analysis visible for a municipality, it's a very interesting way of doing that and of showing where the money goes, let's say, in a way. On the other hand, also at the UvA in Amsterdam, we also worked in not only outside but also inside. So we also mapped buildings, and we also once mapped a hotel, for instance. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not so much the size of the site, but the complexity of it should be related to the amount of time that we stay on location. So if it's a very one-dimensional used square, then in a month we will be able to understand what's happening, for instance. If it's a very complex square from the same size, then we might need more time. But on the other hand, there's always a lot to find out. It's really more about in how far are we as cartopologists still trained to go outside the container after 50 days, let's say, and still be amazed about what we see. So it's about being the extruder in a way, by being the one that comes from the outside, having the fresh eyes and being able of refreshing them each time. That is really what it is about. So it's not so much about a little bit about size and complexity, but it's more about how much am I trained as a cartopologist in a way.
Okay. Next question. After completing a few projects already, do certain patterns become recognizable? Are there design tips for specific conditions that you can give to architects? For example, is it an option to combine your findings and create a kind of manual, or is it every situation so unique?
I think it would be strange to say that now we really understand. Now every situation is unique, and we wouldn't have the guts to say we know it already. We have been there, so we know how it is here. I think that if you would say that, then what have I been talking about during my whole presentation? Although I think there is something there is the strive for writing some sort of manual or exercises for others to do cartopology. So in the method and in getting to know a place and in how we deal with that and in the struggles that we come across, these are sometimes the same. And there's some sort of patterns that you could find. So in the methodology and in how afraid we are at the beginning of not knowing and of not knowing that if what we say is correct and of not being sure that we know enough to say something about it, and to the end of we have to remap it again because I made the same mistake as the previous map. There we can figure some things out. But I feel some sort of disagree next to me.
Well, no, I just want to add that I understand your question, and I think one of the reasons why we started with this practice, started to put all this time and effort in understanding a location, is that by following, let's say, the recipe or the manuals that we knew and know from architecture, applying a certain design principle on one location could work like a charm. It would be perfect. Mm-hmm. And on another location, exactly the same design would work, would totally not work. And, you know, the direction, orientation could be the same, building height could be the same, could be in the same culture, but something else is happening. Why that square or that place is not appropriated over there and is appropriated in another place. And it is exactly that, I think, that for us at least gave enough motivation to dive into every place on a specific local scale and to find out why this difference still exists. So indeed, in our practice, manuals could play a role, but we are very anxious about, or very cautious about applying these on architecture, because we haven't found them yet, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We as students are told how Zumthor, Chipperfield, Yangdale are good examples of architects using the context as a common thread in their designs. How do you look at these firms?
Of course, we know some of the examples you mentioned, or at least some of the buildings of the architects you mentioned. We try to visit them as much as possible. And I think some architects are more than others capable or aware of the fact that a location matters, or are more sensitive to certain aspects of a certain location. Mm-hmm. For example, Zumthor literally mentions it or writes about it, about the importance of location and the way how he deals with a certain place that already exists, and not regarding places as the tabula rasa, for example. So of course we are aware of them. I also recall an interview I heard from the architect, I think it was Lisbeth van der Pol, but I'm not sure. At least an architect that in a radio interview spoke about, you know, I had to design a new building for a library. And before the design process, I went a couple of times on location. I drank a coffee over there. I sat in a bar in front of the place where I need to build. And I think these are all good attempts to grasp the situation more than you can do from a plan or a Google Street View, for example. Mm-hmm. And I think the architects you mentioned are, in a way, also striving for that. So indeed, good examples. And for us, it would be very interesting, for example, if we could dream big, to collaborate with these architects, to give them even more input, because they are simply not able in all ways to spend as much time on location to get as much out of it as we do. So even then, I think it would be an interesting collaboration.
And I think cartopology and the Institute of Cartopology, the goal is really to, what we do and what especially other architects also are doing, but that becomes like mainstream. that it's just part of designing, that it's part of starting an analyst, that it's not only looking for maps from centuries ago to Google Maps and then starting designing, but that today, how we perceive it today, is also part of the research and is also part of the decision making in design process, and that we generate tools for that, and we learn that in architectural studies, because I think it's strange that anthropology or ethnography and those tools and methods is so rarely taught in architectural studies, but also the other way around. How is it possible that anthropologists have no notion about spatial qualities, and how that, of no notion, I'm exaggerating again, but those two are very much combined and very much connected, and we don't see that in for instance, the education.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Enver. To continue, I have a question from Thomas Ohms in the Q&A. So maybe you can ask it yourself, Thomas.
Yeah, I started with a little quote that the map is not a territory, or that's I think a famous quote in this context of mapping and trying to see where there is the difference between what you are studying and how you represent it. And earlier today we had a seminar with Lydia Gasperoni, by the way. And so she's a German philosopher at TU Berlin, and she will give a lecture in this series on the 6th of May. And she discussed the difference between representational aesthetics and performative aesthetics. And I was wondering if you could identify with that distinction, and whether you could identify that, if so, whether you could identify that distinction within your work.
Thank you, Thomas, for that complex question. I think I just read the whole book of Gottman about the languages of art. So I'm very much into representations and what kind of representations and the sorts of the types and the sorts of representations and what's the difference of it. And I think I don't know if there's I'm not sure if I can use the same type of words, but I think, of course, there's an enormous performative aspect in our drawing, because we draw on site. We don't draw at once we're back at home. No, we draw while we're in the field, and that we do by field notes, but also the end drawing, the final drawing. Also, we want it, and it's really a deadline, finished on location, for the simple reason that we tend to believe that we leave the drawing on site unfinished, because space is also constantly changing, so the map should also change with it, but that we're not the authors anymore, that we're not the only ones that are working on it in a way. That's some sort of dream scenario that people would continue working on it, or clients or other people that are dealing with it. So in that way, we think they are very performative and very dynamic in a way. Another thing is something that I find very complicated in the beginning when we start mapping. So when we arrive somewhere, is that you start really with when am I drawing to explain and when am I drawing to understand? And I think those are two different things. When I draw to explain to others, I really don't like drawing like that. I really think it's more an I think yeah, it's a way. I'm not a good graphic designer. I don't really think that drawing works there for me. My aim is really that while I understand and that I'm really capable of being a good drawer in the sense of drawing to understand, that through that process of drawing and through what's happening there on the paper, others will understand as well. So I don't need to draw to explain in a way. But I think there's a difference there. And in the beginning, there's not much to, there's a lot to understand, but there's not much you understand yet. So you represent your first thoughts in a way. And there's some sort of strange thing happening, because you start drawing very abstract, or almost diagram-like, or you start to draw very picturesque-like. So you really start to draw the buildings in a way. And it's only through drawing and through continuing drawing instead of starting over again that the understanding process starts in a way. And that is where I think is the most interesting. So I don't know, when is it performative? When I think I'm performing with my drawing, so when I'm using it to understand and to be in dialogue with, that it helps me to go to my fieldwork, or is it performative when it makes it very active in a use? It depends a little bit on what you mean with that in a way. And I think you can see it in different ways. Is that somehow answering?
Yeah, in a way, because I think when the distinction is used between representation and performative, it means that the representation becomes, it's like a tracing of something. You trace it and it becomes a sort of a double in another media. Whether when it is performative, it transforms the representation, or it goes beyond the representation. It becomes something else, and it receives at that point a certain agency. So that means that it goes towards something. And maybe it hints to one of the first or the last one of the observations also of Mitch, is how do you continue, or how do you expect that there will be a continuation of the work? That's in a way how does the methodology can be a step in the design process and becomes projective in that sense. So it looks forward. And in a sense, the mapping, the drawing in a way is discovering something that is there. It is uncovering in a certain way. But at the same time, there is an agency to it because you do this with the idea of uncovering something for something.
Yeah.
And was wondering how that part of the research of the work is understood, is grasped, and is applied or used.
Yeah, the first part of your question about when you were explaining about representation, and performative, I think in that way we see each other, or I see myself really as a research instrument. And how am I calibrated to really draw what's on the paper? And we did a project for it with the research center here at Zuyd Hogeschool, to really understand how do I work, how do I see, because what you say, I completely agree with it, with the fact that and when I'm drawing and somebody else is drawing the same building or the same scenery, a complete different drawing will come out of it. And it's exactly trying to understand why you draw that way, and why you didn't draw the other way around, is really that is really understanding the location. That is really, again, through us, how a location functions for us, or how we are observing it. So seeing ourselves as the research instrument is how we work, and it's a very, it's maybe, well, it's a very artistic way of looking at it. And then I come to your second question: how can it then become useful for others? And I think that's again a twofold. How can then the method of doing cartopology be shared? Because how much is it related to us? And how much is it independent? Can also others do, but you see Mitch is also doing his thing, which is somehow related, so it's not only connected to us. So it is somehow open source, but it's quite complicated to deal with. But also what you say is about how could our clients work with it, or how could inhabitants work with it, and continuing drawing on it. And I think in our practice in Deer Hunter, we try to do that on several ways, and the one that we think up until now that works the best is really that from the moment that we arrive, every week or at least every 2 weeks, we are in contact with the client, so that he sees also the process and the growth of the map, so that he becomes already at that point somehow author. So he performs somehow with us that map, even though he's not drawing, even though he's not participating in that way, but he's participating surely in another way, so that at the end, when we leave after 3 months, the map is not something new, something that he needs to become familiar with, but it's already a document that he has used and that he's familiar with during our period and our stay. Another thing what we are really trying to do now, and that's where the Institute pops in again, is that it's not only the making and sharing that process, but it's also the reading. How do you want your maps to be read or read? How do you want people to deal with it? And maybe a part of being a good cartopologist is also coming up with exercises and manuals of how to read such a map, how to use it, how to be familiar with. And that is something that we're trying to deal with. So in the first couple of years ago, we were very much about what are we doing, what is cartopology, what are the steps that we take, me as an instrument, as a research instrument, what am I doing? I should be very much aware of what I'm doing so that it becomes somehow academic research, or that at least I can somehow argue on that level as well. And now we're very much about, if that's the outcome, how do you want people to read it? How do you want them to come to it? Is also something that needs to be part of your map somehow. And that is something that we're just starting with, thinking in that direction. So not starting from us as a research instrument, but starting from the map as one way of representing, and how can we work with it? How can we share that as well? And that's still completely quite new for us.
Thanks. I suggest, because it's starting to get rather late, to do some very quick question that I read from the Q&A. The work that you showed is all hand-drawn. It's a question by Janat. If I'm not mistaken, is there a reason for this, or do you think technology can also add value to cartopology?
I think the field work, it's often a combination. For me, it works the best when I start with analog drawing, because it's a way of looking. It's not really a way of drawing, it's a way of looking, a way of observing, a way of being the necessity of looking precisely that a drawing asks in order to be able to simply draw that elevation or that street is something that I only have with analog drawing. At a certain point, and even through the process of 3 months, we scan them a couple of times, and then we continue working on it on the computer. So everything that is more diagram-like, so that is more scaled up, has to do more with reflection and less with fieldwork, is often added on the computer. But the fieldwork and trying to understand is really analog drawing. And I also very much believe in finishing each drawing in a way of not just doing a quick sketch, but using each drawing as, finishing each drawing in a way of it can be part of your end result, so that you're not working towards an end result, or that's not really something that you're thinking of, but that they're constantly in finding out in a way. And it also makes you be more precise or more conscious about what you're drawing. Yeah.
I think this is actually also an interesting question for Mitch. We haven't seen your work yet, but how do you feel with the hand drawing and
Yeah, I think to make it quite simple, I am terrible on digital devices, so there's a real necessity for me to stick to hand drawing, because I just can't get my head around digital surfaces. But I agree. I mean, I think for me, it's the immediacy of the hand drawing. And what I'm trying to create is almost like a chain of images and notations that go from my first day on site, my first day there, to the very last. And by keeping it hand drawn, by keeping it in that sort of aesthetic and in that sort of space, if you like, there is a unity then, which is important, because when you look at my work, it's quite out there, and it's actually, you know, it's a ramshackle collection of different observations and moments. So the hand-drawn element links me to the site, it links me to the field, and it also links the visuals together in a way. It creates a shared sensibility and a shared sense, which I then think makes it easier for other people to navigate it, to understand it, and to engage with it. So there's a lot of reasons, some of them very pragmatic, but I don't want it to be a moment of disconnect between my methods of making and the kind of visuals and artifacts that I'm creating. I want it all to have a flow through it. I hope that makes sense, but that's certainly what I'm trying to retain. So yeah, I stick to the pencil and the pen all the way through as a result.
Okay, thanks. I would like to allow one more question. That is one that was already inserted in the Q&A from very early onwards, and then wrap it up with that last question. It is a question from Min Min T, and maybe you can address it yourself.
Okay, hello. Yeah, so my name is Ming. Actually, I'm also from KU Leuven. So our research lab have done a lot of cartography in urbanism. So I found your presentation very interesting, but my question is more toward the critical role of cartography. I think it's overlapped with several previous questions already, in the sense that when we show a lot of diversity that we unfold through drawing, through different, I don't know, people participation, etc., then all these things are embedded in a kind of aim or a research program, so that the main aim kind of direct the way that we draw, or the way that we kind of how we organize the people. So can you elaborate a little bit on the critical role of the cartography or the cartographic process in your research?
I can try. It's a very, or we can try. It's a very broad question, and I think there's already a difference between cartography and map making. Map making, we have been, you could almost say that the first drawing ever found was already some sort of map in a way. I think cartography got much more defined from the moment that we really started navigating and we really started exploring the world much more. I think there's already quite a difference. On the other hand, what I also think is I mean, I think it's important that you raise that question, and it's important that the power of maps is something that we can't forget. But I don't think that that we are really dealing with maps in that way. We are dealing with maps in a way to understand and to try to understand what's happening on a certain location. If you compare that, for instance, with the architectural drawing, with a plan, with an urban plan, for instance, then I think the power that, or how zeg je dat? How much we apply on locations by an urban plan is also something that is quite questionable in a way. Like I explained in the beginning, with squares and triangles and circles, we define buildings and squares and public space, and then on that basis, we're trying to change something. So that is also very much imposing something. So I think if we are judging cartography in that way, which I think we really need to do, and it's something that we can't forget, but I think that we can't forget the urban plan adding to that, because that one is also a quite imposing way of mapping in a way. Yeah, and that that we sometimes forget to think it that way.
Indeed, I think we're not that much interested in trying to label our work or anyone else's work as critical or non-critical or radical cartography, for example, like these terms. But we are more, I think, interested in the process of reading maps, making maps. And for example, if you talk about Google Maps, from a certain perspective, it is, of course, a very one-dimensional map, but just being open and being able to read and to look at such a map also, to see that some burger restaurants are on it and other bars are not on it, and think about the decisions behind these maps without trying to judge them, but be open to every kind of map and see how these all can be piled up or stacked up together, and together tell a certain or give a certain image of a certain place with all the various perspectives. I think that's the way how we try to put maps in practice, to regard them also as one certain truth or one way of looking at a certain area. And in that way, a combination of very uncritical maps, for example, could tell quite a lot about the time we live in or the specific place we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think once Henk van Houten from the Border Research Center at the Radboud Universiteit in Nijmegen told me, the more maps we have, the better. It's really something about quantity. The more ways the more different ways and approaches of representing a location, the closer we come to maybe a total image and a representation of that location. And that's really something I agree with. That doesn't mean that I don't believe in quality and that I don't think my maps should be very qualitative, but we need a lot of them of the same location to really say something. And then I come back to the layers and the forest in a way.
Yeah, I'm fine, I think. Thank you very much.
Yeah, fantastic. I think this is actually a good point to close this off, in the sense that I think this will come back tomorrow a lot, because it really relates also to Mitch's work. For now, I'm super glad, I said again, that you were here and that you agreed to join this. Okay, thank you very much. Everybody have a great night.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.